Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from wherever you are joining in for this, I'm being told now 31st webinar in the series of the Global ESCO Network webinars on energy performance contract and ESCO, and part of our contribution towards our goal and missions to be the global driver to promote the ESCO concept as a response to the climate problem. Again, thank you for joining. Today, we have a webinar on a topic that has been requested to be touched upon on multiple occasions. It was also one of the central topics discussed at our fairly recent International ESCO Symposium that was held in Istanbul, Turkey, hosted by Econoler, the National ESCO Association in Turkey. In today's webinar, again, Super ESCO, and a specific case, an example provided on how a Super ESCO can facilitate implementation of energy performance contracting for municipalities. So a specific modality to implement smaller scale, but a multiple scale of energy efficiency measures in multiple smaller facilities. So here, the functioning of a Super ESCO, which can be multiple things depending on the sort of jurisdiction and setup, but in this case, both as aggregator, also financier and regulatory aspects that are merged together to make this mechanism function. And to present on the topic, we have with us Pierre Langlois, which is, I would say, one of the superstars of the ESCO world. He's been in the business for very long. Many of you probably already know him. He has more than 35 years of experience in the topic of ESCOs and implementing energy efficiency projects in over 60 countries. He is the president of Econoler, co-manager of SOFIAC, the private Super ESCO, which is active in both Canada and France, and also a co-chair of the Global ESCO Network. So without further ado, I think, Pierre, you probably already know a lot of the listeners. We are all eager to hear about the Canadian experience. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Federico, for this introduction, and happy to be able to join the initiative of the webinars of the Global ESCO Network and present a very big innovation in the Super ESCO world, which is one on the municipal sector. So what I will do, I will share a screen. So again, I'm Pierre Langlois. I've been working in that field for many years, as Federico said. And what I'm going to present to you is one of the innovation we have within Canada related to municipality. It's based, among others, on some of the few Super ESCO we've been designing and operating in the last 7 years. One in Canada, one in France, as well as one in Morocco, the Fonds Africain d'Efficacité Énergétique, and the one in the municipal sector that we're just introducing. So I'll make about a 30-minute presentation about the context of in Canada about municipalities, the introduction to the initiative, the needed legislative and regulatory changes, the private sector financing we're using, the multi-sector environment, as you'll see, what is innovative about the whole thing, and where we're standing right now on this initiative. So first of all, in Canada and in Quebec, Quebec is one of the 10 provinces of Canada. Canada doesn't have a very good track record on climate change and as far as carbon emissions. It's the second highest CO2 emissions per inhabitant among the G20. Per capita, we're notably higher than the global average, roughly 3 times higher. It's partly due because of the size of the country. It's partly because of the weather that we're facing. But nevertheless, we're very big emitters and a very high energy consumer in all sectors, will it be industrial and any kind of buildings, as well as transport. Specifically of the province of Quebec, which is about a quarter of Canada, not in size, but as well as as far as population. The government of Quebec, as many provinces, around Canada set a pretty strict target about carbon emission reductions, and we are aiming at 37% reduction by 2030 based on 1990 emissions. One of the challenges we have in energy costs in Quebec is very, very low. Partly because we do have massive hydraulic capacity. We have almost 45,000 megawatt capacity with a legacy that helps us to have electricity costs that are pretty low, 4 to 10 cents per kilowatt hour. This is in Canadian dollar, not in US dollars, which is about 75% of a Canadian dollar. And natural gas is pretty low as well, 30 to 40 cents, due to the fact that we're in the center of production units, whether it's in the US or in Canada. One of the particularities as well is municipalities, contrary to other countries or many countries, they cannot declare bankruptcy. They're not individual entities. They are essentially creations by the government of Quebec. So they are entities that are, even though they are independently managed, they're still supported financially by the government. So they cannot declare bankruptcy, and their debt levels are strictly regulated by the provincial government, limiting financial flexibility, which is definitely an asset, because we know that they're very credit-worthy clients, but they are limited as far as what they can do as far as investment. And as you can guess, energy efficiency, carbon emission reduction, and all that is high in the priorities, but it's not the only priorities. There's a lot of others related to social and infrastructure investment that limits the capacity to invest very often in these kind of projects. Another specificity of that market that we're targeting as far as municipalities, the number. So there's over 1,100 municipalities in Quebec for a population of about 9 million people, which makes most municipalities very small. So we have 10 bigger ones, if we can count on Montreal, which is the biggest one, which is about 2 million people, 2.5 million people. And then you have Quebec City, about 0.5 million. And then you have all the others. And as you can see, the average size of municipalities about 3,000 to 5,000. So it's rather small as far as number of municipalities, and it means that the investment that we can do in each one individually is rather small as well, because of the size. Not only that, but these municipalities have multiple buildings, and most of the buildings, as you can imagine, in the small municipalities are very, very small. So that means that within an investment of $400,000 or $500,000, you may have 20 facilities you have to cover, making each project rather small, which is a challenge for all of you who understand the energy performance contracting scheme and the transaction costs that are associated with doing projects. The other context is because these municipalities are rather small, if we accept again the 10 biggest one, and especially the 5 biggest one, these municipalities are small, and they have a lack of in-house technical expertise and awareness, making it difficult to assess opportunity and manage performance-based contract. So in front of us in these municipalities, there's very often a small municipal council, maybe an engineer, very rarely there's one, and there's very, very small facilities. So it's very challenging to have expertise and technical capacity to identify project and implement project. Again, insufficient internal resources. So not only do they have the specialized staff, but they have even difficulty to dedicate staff to invest time and effort in structuring and implementing a project. Like I said, there's limited borrowing capacity, because the municipalities are restricted by the government to borrow too much, because they're covering their debt, so they have a strict management there. And during the annual budgeting, there's always discussions about how to prioritize the use of these budgets. And the needs are so big, and the capacity of the financing is so limited, that obviously changing something that is currently functioning, that is currently working, is challenging. So very often these projects, even though that people are more sensitive about it, the capacity to put these projects on top of the pile and make them a priority is difficult. ESCOs cannot go directly to these municipalities, because there has to be a procurement process to do so, and it's almost impossible for the municipalities, at least the smaller ones, to do so. And the projects are very small individually. So even though you could have an ESCO who could potentially implement the project would be very small. And ESCOs normally in Canada would work on project for more than $1 million, and I would say even often more than $3 or $4 million in the hospitals and school sector and in the industrial sector. So looking at projects that would be less than $100,000 or even $10,000 becomes very complicated for an ESCO. The other specificity, which is important in the design, is the municipalities have two associations. So there's two associations who regroup all the municipalities, one being the Fédération Québécoise, so the Federation of Municipalities. And the very specific part about that design is that federation has the capacity to act on the behalf of the municipalities and essentially tender projects in their name, making them a very important actor for us and a partner in what I'm going to present. So the initiative that I'm presenting has been in the making for the last five or 6 years. The concept is obviously to use performance contracting and with a shared saving approach to essentially use private sector financing to enable the implementation of the project in the public sector. So we went to see the FQM, the federation, with that idea and the design, and we essentially at the beginning presented the concept, which was very, very interesting for them because they found a way to really help their municipalities in implementing things that they could not otherwise, addressing all the barriers, and on top of that, providing the added value financing that the municipalities could not do if there were some changes in the regulations. And that's what we started to work for 2021 to 2023. There were regulatory foundations. So we had to make some legislative changes related to the procurement process that would enable to use the performance contracting scheme. They will have regulatory changes as well related to the capacity to use that financing, which is built against a reduction of cost for order to not limit the capacity of the municipalities to implement these projects and not limit their capacity to borrow at the same time. As the end result, they could consider such a project some kind as of an expense, and they would replace the cost of electricity and natural gas and oil that they pay by a payment to the Super ESCO created, making it an operating expense and not an investment. It still becomes a debt, and I'll cover that later on, but the debt will be treated differently than others, enabling the municipalities to do whatever they can do with their budget, plus the fact that they would implement these projects. From 2024 to 2025, then we went in the final design. That's almost where we are. The final launch, official launch of projects and not the initiative itself, is going to be done in about a month. So what we've done during that time is the final design and the detailed design, which I'm going to present a little bit, plus the securing of the financing. And we're going to go through SOFIAC, which is the private sector Super ESCO in Canada that will provide the capacity for financing through another structure that I'm going to present as well. And 2026, when you say the launch phase, it's actually when the investment is actually going to be deployed. So during the fall, we expect to have tenders, and these tenders will essentially end up to selecting an ESCO that will be able to implement the project. In order to do so, as you can imagine, all of that required quite a lot of human resources and capacity to implement all that. So we received a couple of grants, not huge one, but a couple of grants. The government of Canada and the government of Quebec do have grant programs that applies for accelerating the implementation of decarbonization initiatives. So there was one from the Quebec government of $900,000 that enabled the structuring of the whole thing. And we were able to capitalize as well some of the cost related to the design and of the facility that will be capitalized into the fund that enable all of that to be put together. So as a structure, for most of you are familiar with the Super ESCO scheme, will not find anything very innovative in this. So the program itself, the Super ESCO itself, is called EcoEnergy 360. And essentially, it will work directly with the municipality on a shared saving agreement and with a guaranteed saving agreement with the ESCOs. EcoEnergy 360, EcoEnergy 360, is a society that's been created by the FQM, so by the Federation. So again, reminding everyone that the FQM can contract directly sole source with municipalities without the need of a tender because of a special status that they have. So that's why we use the FQM, among others, as a vehicle to be able to work within a municipality. So now we eliminate the need for bidding on the municipality side for the Super ESCO. But FQM is still binded, by the rules of contracting related to procuring an ESCO. So then we have to go through procurement to select an ESCO. Where is the financing coming from? When the financing is coming from on a direct source from SOFIMVER. SOFIMVER is an investment of SOFIAC. So essentially SOFIAC, which is currently the Super ESCO in Canada, has $200 million of capacity of financing that it's used already. So during the last year, we structured another round for $1 billion, and out of that $1 billion, $300 million will be dedicated to the municipal sector. So essentially, SOFIAC has an investment, which is SOFIMVER, and that investment essentially invests into that structure, EcoEnergy 360, that will finance the project on the behalf of the municipalities and will be able to pay the ESCO to actually pay. The ESCO, the municipality on their side, will repay the savings to the program. So the key features. It's still a turnkey program for municipalities. So on their side, what they see is EcoEnergy 360 as a turnkey provider that will provide not only the financing, but also provide all the capacity to identify project, procure the whole thing, select the ESCO, contract the ESCO, follow the ESCO, pay the ESCO, and essentially at the end, demonstrate the savings. There's no front cost for the municipalities and no impact on their long-term debt of municipalities, which becomes an immense asset because, again, as I said, they're technically limited in their capacity to borrow. And with the approach we have now with the government, we're able to implement these projects without limiting the capacity of the municipalities to use their own financing. We adapt an EPC, so an energy performance contracting scheme, tailored to the needs of municipalities. So we simplified it quite a lot, as you can guess, because many of these projects are too small to essentially operate under a full EPC scheme. The program manages the entire tendering process with the ESCO. Savings are measured and verified by an independent third party. And we'll see that the measurement and verification is still following IPMVP and the best practices. But because of the size, we will essentially use option A and option B, so dedicated approaches. And we will use as well, in some cases, deemed savings because the savings are too small on individual projects, not being complying with IPMVP, but still making sense when savings on a building or a facility is a few $1,000s a year. It's not worth measuring all these savings for the long term of the contractual agreement, which is 15 years. The asset will belong fully to the municipality at the start of the project, where we're transferring all the asset to the municipalities day one, so they can operate it and continue to operate their building as before. And all available financing incentives are fully applied to the projects. In Canada, we do have a lot of subsidies coming from utilities, government, and so on. It becomes a huge asset at some point because 30-40% of the project can be subsidized. It becomes a huge barrier because to access these grants, it becomes quite complicated because one competes with the other, one is not complementary with the other. Sometimes you can use one and not the other. So just only that knowledge and that capacity to attract all these grants and to make sure they're fully used becomes an asset of the program. We also kicked in a small initiative, a small incentive for the municipalities. So we will leave them up to 10% of the savings annually to give them not only an incentive to improve their buildings and reduce their carbon emission, but also to increase their financial capacity and use those savings for other purposes and meeting needs of the municipalities. Some of the innovations we have to work, as I said, legislative changes. One of the things that we've done, and it took many years to do, and that's why it took like more than 5 years to get where we are, is normally municipalities are binded by the lower cost approach. So when they bid on something, there's that normal procedure that they use. There are alternatives, but none of those were fitting the way we wanted to use the program or to implement the program. So essentially what we've done is we introduced a legislative change for the municipalities through the Municipality Act, enabling municipalities in the case of energy efficiency and carbon emission projects, to carbon emission reduction projects, to use the highest value of projects and not the lowest cost, which means that what we will going to be looking with ESCOs within a certain structure that we will give them is the ESCO that can provide the highest savings, so the best projects given the 15 years length that we have, given the 90% that we will use to reimburse the projects, and given an increase of energy costs over time that will be pre-agreed, and using that format to select an ESCO. And then ESCOs can be innovative and provide the best value, the best added value. So this is exactly what we've done as far as selection criteria. So the ESCOs will be able to select an ESCO in a different way. And for contract same and improved energy performance equipment and infrastructure, the criteria, again, is based on projected energy savings and or carbon emission reduction. Again, we do have very clean energy in Quebec as far as electricity. So yes, we're focusing on carbon emission reduction on the side of everything that is carbon important, but we also focus on energy saving because we have another challenge within the province, which is a peak demand increase, which is important, and there's a challenge to meet that peak demand. Just as an information, when I said we have 45,000 megawatt installed capacity, that is needed during winter time, but during summertime, we go as low as 25,000. So there's a huge gap, and you can understand the peak demand that there is because of the weather and the activities during the winter. So the peak demand is also a very big focus of us. And when we will select an ESCO, it will be, yes, carbon emission reduction, it will be energy savings per se, and it will be peak reduction that will be part of that selection criteria. On the debt mitigation ratio, like I said, municipalities have limited capacity. So we had to use a way to enable our project to not become a debt that will affect that limited capacity to borrow. And that's what we introduced also as a change, a regulatory change, is the government accepted that, yes, it will be a debt at the end of the day. It's a conditional debt. It's only going to be paid if there are savings that are demonstrated and paid. But on the other end, it will eliminate it from the normal debt calculation and put it aside as something that will not influence the total debt capacity. So that was also a long discussions with the ministry. They find it very interesting because they understood that at the end of the day, the municipalities will be in better shape as far as financial capacity than they were before, because their energy costs will go down more than the actual repayment to the Super ESCO. So, and if there was no savings, which will not happen, but assuming there was no savings, there will be no payment. So the municipalities will always be cash flow positive throughout the process, so making it very interesting for the government, which is covering the debt of the municipalities. We will ask from the ESCO the performance guarantee. So obviously all the technical risk is given to the ESCOs themselves. We'll provide a technical guarantee on the equipment and on the project performance. We structure, as I said, and the structuring is pretty complicated because we have to use with investors. We invest in SOFIAC. The SOFIAC itself is investing into an SPV, which is SOFIMVERT. SOFIMVERT, which is a French term, so SOFI for SOFIAC and VERT, M for municipalities, and VERT for green. So essentially, we created that one, which is going to be an investment of the bigger one, the $1 billion facility, and that one will invest within each project. We will have an attractive return on equity for the investors. First of all, because it will be very unrisky, because we're working with municipalities which cannot default, and we will have an investment grade approach with all the projects, because we will have on one hand very securitized clients, and on the other hand very securitized ESCOs that we will work with. On the private sector structuring, as I said, we're going to have a structure which is quite similar with the SOFIAC private sector approach, which is any performance exceeding the guaranteed savings is shared between the fund and the municipality. So we're incentivizing everyone to essentially overperform. We're not incentivizing the ESCO in themselves, because in Canada, there's not such a culture of ESCOs benefiting from the added value. We added it at the beginning. We eliminated it at this moment because the ESCO did not value it that much. It would value a lot more the project cost itself at the beginning and the capacity to generate a profit. We have a very low risk municipal profile, as I said. We have a very strong environmental and social governance, because the program qualifies for all ESG friendly investment targeting energy efficiency in public infrastructure structures. So the investors are very happy about the focus of the fund. And like the $300 million of initial capacity is essentially raised from SOFIAC, as I said, out of the $1 billion that we have, for a market, total market for the municipal sector itself of 1.5 billion. So even though we're investing massively of $300 million in the municipalities for the next 5 years, there's still a huge amount that's still going to be left. But as investors, we didn't want to target all projects. So 300 million out of 1.5 was quite good for them as well, because they saw the capacity to invest that amount. The focus is going to be done on all municipal building, but we will focus essentially on water treatment plants, which is the biggest consumer. We will focus on ice rink, which we have quite a lot in Canada, indoor pools, and we have street lighting as well. A lot of the street lighting has already been done, but there's a leftover as well that's going to be integrated. We will integrate as well all other savings that can be identified. So yes, it's energy savings that is for the focus, but if there was maintenance savings, operating savings, or whatever, they can be valued as well in the capacity to repay of the investment. We give ourselves 6 years of capital deployment, and after that, up to 15 years of repayment, making the project attractive, because now we're able to use all the savings generated over the 15 years to repay the investment and the investors' return. So you see a little bit the structuring. SOFIAC is co-managed by an organization, Econoler and Fondaction. Fondaction is a pension fund of workers. It is an investor within SOFIAC, but it's also the co-manager of the SOFIAC, the co-manager with Econoler. SOFIAC and the Federation essentially invest in SOFIMVER, probably 99% from SOFIAC and 1% from FQM, but it was important that the design that they would be there. SOFIMVER itself invests in EcoEnergy, and then we have the Super ESCO scheme below. Multiple stakeholders environment. Well, what the biggest challenge we have is the project size, like I said. So the challenge is to be able to structure these projects in a way that they are attractive. So we will bundle them, and we will bundle them into bids that will include many municipalities and will include all the projects within a municipality, making the size, interestingly, viable for ESCOs. Internal capacity, while we have a limited absence of capacity in small cities, we have bigger one in larger cities, but the project is going to be flexible to either replace or offer fully that capacity to structure the program, or with bigger municipalities to work with them hand in hand to launch and implement the project. And we have certainly a certain complexity because it's still public procurement, and the public procurement is complex. We tried to simplify it, and that was a lot of the focus within the design, to simplify the procurement process within the limitation of the regulations, to make things attracting for the ESCOs, make things attracting for the municipalities, and find a way to limit their cost in developing the project at the beginning. On measurement and verification, as you know, is the core of what we have to do. Well, we have to optimize the cost by balancing the precision and the affordability of the MNV. So we use IPMVP. For larger buildings, we will fully use IPMVP as an approach. We will use standardized MNV approaches because the buildings are quite similar from one to another. So we're prescriptive for the ESCOs to how to use MNV in different type of buildings, so reducing the transaction cost. We will accept the savings for small asset generating interesting but limited savings. And we will use also a sampling approach to demonstrate on a program basis that even though there are deemed savings in part of the assets, we will validate those savings through a sampling-based approach to ensure both the government and the organization who are granting the program that the savings will actually be there. Last but not least, for all MNV, that's going to be done by an independent third party, which essentially will increase credibility because none of the stakeholders directly involved in the results, would it be the investors, would it be the FQM, would it be the ESCOs or the municipalities, are not directly involved in the MNV. The aggregation is probably the most challenging part of the program because whenever we will bid out something, we will have to use many municipalities together. So the strategy is essentially to try to use one bigger municipality not necessarily one of the big 10, but at least one which is regionally based, which is the bigger one of the region, and adding up small municipalities around it, making a project, a group of maybe 15 or 20 municipalities with a range of investment between $5 and $10 million. Obviously, that's going to be bigger for bigger municipalities when possible, but the smaller range we're going to try to have is $5 to $10 million, but probably with 400 buildings within each bid, which means that the tendering efficiency will have to be considered because we don't want the ESCOs to work on 400 buildings to provide a bid. So we will work again on sampling. We will work on way to limit the request on how to bid for the ESCOs, and we will provide them a lot of initial information so they don't have to look for it during the bid process. So the grouping is interesting. It will limit transaction costs, will increase the ESCO interest, and will limit globally the effort by all stakeholders within that approach. Like I said, the project is now entering its final phase. We will close the fund probably next week. We will initiate all documentation for the ESCOs to understand the program probably within July. By September, we will probably launch the first projects, the first tenders, which will lead to the selection of an ESCO by the end of 2025. And then we will target for the first phase, the initial phase of the 6 years, about 200 municipalities. We have actually engaged through an agreement with SOFIAC and with EcoEnergy 360 to go forward with the project. So on that, I'm assuming there might be some questions about the initiative, so I'll welcome them, and hopefully that was of interest as far as this innovation in the Super ESCO scheme.
Thank you very, very, very much for this interesting presentation. I found it enlightening and actually addressing many of the topics and challenges and needs that were discussed also at the symposium in Istanbul. And I see that this also provides a solution to some of the challenges that were described there. So before entering into the questions, first of all, congratulate you on this initiative. I see that the challenge of size of the single interventions is addressed here through the bundling of different smaller projects into larger investments. I also see here that the challenge of the size of the investments is covered by the SPVs and investment vehicles. So private investors get the size that they are looking for. So I think this is a good example that maybe can be brought to other markets to do something about the scale of EPC diffusion and implementation. I think here the public sector has a huge role to play, because I think doing something similar to this in the private space would probably not be possible in terms of aggregation, bundling, and so forth. But I think it's a good model to maybe replicate, of course, adjusting to local conditions in other markets. So no question, it was just a comment from my side, but there are questions. And I'll see if I can try to group them in topics, but some of them might come chronologically. And I take the first one. Can the EcoEnergy 360 scheme be combined with investment grants from the province or Canada?
Yes, it is. And actually, the way we work at it is the ESCOs were providing the grant. So we are lucky in Canada that we have a pretty strong ESCO market. ESCOs has been introduced in 1980. There's been a lot of projects in the public sector, essentially in the hospitals and the municipal and as well in the federal government level type of buildings. So we have a strong ESCO market. The ESCOs are pretty good. They are good at implementing. They're good, first of all, at identifying the savings, implementing, and guaranteeing the savings. But the other thing they're pretty good at is identifying the grants, because obviously there's a lot of grants in Canada, and it becomes some kind of a specialty. it's quite complex to apply to these grants. And when you're not used to it, it's not as simple. So essentially what we do is we ask the ESCO within their project design to include the grants in their cost. So for them, it's very interesting because if they're 40% grants that can be applied, a $5 million project automatically becomes a $7 million or $8 million project. So for them, it's bigger. We ask them something additional, which we ask them to guarantee the grants. So not only but they also have the guarantee of the grants, making it a very turnkey project for them because they're guaranteeing their cost and they're guaranteeing the grant. So yes, all the grants are optimized within the facility, and that's done with the ESCO and with their at the design time that they do for each of the building and each of the municipalities.
Interesting. So you also have ESCOs. The ESCOs are specialized as well in accessing these grants. Do you think there will be a challenge for newcomers that might not be, or is it a challenge at all?
Yes, well, it is not only a challenge, but is a goal for us. So essentially, the market we're very, we have a very strong ESCO market, but we don't have a limited number of ESCOs, as you can guess. So we have about 15, I would say, within Canada that are quite active. They're not active in all provinces necessarily. And in Quebec, maybe we have 4 that are very active and maybe 8 all over that are present. Our goal is not only to have these 8 be interested in the program, but essentially add up a few new ones because we're massively investing. As you see, SOFIAC altogether, including the municipal sector, will have invested about $1.5 billion in the next 5 years, which is massive compared to the typical ESCO market in Canada, which was maybe $500 million a year. So then we're adding it up over and above everything. So what we want is we have new actors coming in. And one of the things that we will do during the summer is do a roadshow, not only to the current ESCOs within Canada, so to present them the program and attract them within the program, but also to other potential actors, engineering firms, construction firms, who could potentially structure between themselves a new initiative, a new ESCO. Also because the territory is very, very big. So just remember that Quebec in itself is, as I think, and I don't want to mistake anyone, but I think it's 6 times the size of France. Most of it is empty, right? But it's still a very, very big territory. So you cannot necessarily have an ESCO, which is one part of Quebec, and do necessarily the implementation in the other part because it becomes quite far away. So the idea is to integrate local players as well. And some of the projects are rather small. Many of these ESCOs can implement projects of 10, 20, and we even have $50 million projects within SOFIAC on the private sector. So you can understand $5 million is rather small on the size of the current ESCOs. So we hope that there's going to be new players coming in, looking at projects that are nearby their facility within their regional territory, that have the capacity to identify these projects, which are not very complex. That's the other particularity of the municipal sector, is we're not into the innovation and the measures. They're pretty simple: lighting, cooling, heating, motors, pretty simple stuff. So we hope there's going to be those actors, and we will promote it actively. Yes, so there's newcomers coming in.
Okay. Well, let me then just go over to the next question, which is goes into technologies and other matters. First of all, well, a lot of thank yous I see in the questions here as well, but first, could you please highlight the list of major ECM, so energy conservation measures considered, so maybe to have an idea of the technologies, I guess, here that you most likely will be focusing on. And then as a follow-up question, IPMVP option A and option B will be used for MMV. Could you confirm the planned baseline measurement periods?
Yeah. Okay. So very good question. As far as the technology, we have to look at the portfolio of buildings we have. So we're in Quebec. We are in a society that is rather rich. So it has a lot of buildings that are used for a lot of reasons here. For example, water treatment plants. We have a lot of ice rink. Hockey is our national sport, so we have a lot of indoor ice rinks. We have indoor pools. We have municipal buildings as garages, as storing places. But all these buildings are not so complicated. Maybe with the arenas, the ice rink, and the pools, but they're still rather simple. It's heating, it's cooling. So the technologies are pretty simple. We will have lighting. There's still a lot of lighting opportunity. There are controls opportunity quite a lot. That's probably the biggest one that we have. It's still not so sophisticated, but it's definitely needed. We have heat recovery systems in both ice rinks and water and indoor pools, and we have a lot of motors. So in the water treatment plants, it's essentially motor. We also have a heating need, which is quite a lot. Not as big as a cooling need, even though with climate change that is increasing. But the biggest consumer in Quebec is heating. So we have a lot of heating, and the heating is done either by electricity whenever we can because it's clean, or we have thermal boilers, so either natural gas or oil. So in the decarbonization space, there's essentially heat pumps that are going to be used. That's one of the technology that is very pushed in Quebec because we're focusing on eliminating the carbon emissions with clean energy, clean electricity, and it's as well very, very efficient. So it works very well in our climate. So these are essentially the technologies. Nothing fancy, nothing very complicated. The challenge is not the technology itself, is the size, is the number of facility that you have to deal with. As far as IPMVP, the idea is that we develop an initial baseline, which is the time of use, which is the conditions of the building. This is provided to the ESCOs because we cannot provide a detailed baseline for an option A and option B per equipment or per system because it would be way too complex if we don't know where the ESCO are going to be focusing on. So we provide them the basic, essentially the time of use, the conditions, any specificity of the buildings, and that's how the ESCO provide their initial proposal. Once they get into the investment grade audit, then we ask them to go and measure and verify the specific equipment that's going to be the focus of the measure. So that's how we use the option A and option B, because there's going to be measurement before and measurement after. Everything that is below $10,000 of savings per year will not be focused as on measurement and verification, will be done on deemed savings, essentially because the number is too high. The savings are rather obvious as you replace lamps or you change motors. It's kind of obvious, but we'll still go through, as I said, a sampling, which is not part of IPMVP, but it's part of a program design where even though we use quite a lot of these savings because these savings are very, very small, and we don't measure them necessarily, but we will do sampling. So we will do some measurement and verification of some of these small measures to make sure that globally we're reaching the goals. But for IPMVP option A and option B, it's going to be on the side of the ESCO for all measures, all individual measures that save more than $10,000 a year. There will be a request to measure before, measure after. Because the project is 15 years, you can understand that the length of the measurement is also an issue. So when we use option A, we're able to limit it to the actual demonstration for a limited period, maybe an hour, maybe 1 day, maybe 1 week, 1 month, maybe 1 year, but not the full 15 years because that would be way too cost intensive to do so.
Okay, I'll filter a little bit in the questions, keeping it to technology again. Is PV, so solar panels, included in terms of reducing demand?
Yeah. Okay. So I've not mentioned it because obviously we're in a place in the world where there's not as much sun as there are in other places. We have a lot of snow, which make it a little bit more complex also, because the roofs where you could add PV are designed to sustain the snow weight, but not necessarily added weight when there's a snowstorm. But it's not not possible. So what we say to the ESCO, everything's on the table. Everything that they can propose can be it. So likely there's going to be some solar. Likely there's going to be some innovation. Some ESCOs may want to work on the demand side. So not only on the efficiency of the equipment, but the reduction of the demand, which may not be optimized. We have also a measure on peak demand. Like I said, we're focusing on peak demand. So there's bonuses within the utility to reduce the peak. So there's going to be peak demand measures, but everything is on the table. We ask the ESCO not only for cost, we ask the ESCO for innovation. So we hope that they're going to go deep into the retrofitting possibilities. They will use all technologies. Solar is part of it. Geothermal is part of it. Heat pump is part of it. I mentioned the most likely one because they apply to all the buildings, but otherwise everything is on the table, and hopefully solar will make its way. But again, we have challenges about weather and conditions that we have in our part of the world, which is a little bit more challenging than if we're in other parts where sun is there most of the time.
I mean, peak is not only an issue in Canada. I think that's can also apply to warmer climates. Just a different reason for why the peaks is there. When we look at cooling, I have a long list of questions here, and I will try to group them and make them my own, so to speak, because some of them touch upon common aspects, which is like who is preparing the projects on municipal level, something about the tendering process. So I think basically, if you have the possibilities to take us through a little bit of the process of identifying who is identifying energy measures and preparing the tendering documents. And you mentioned that they can also, the ESCOs also propose. So I would assume, and it looks here because there are some preconceptions. So maybe if you can take us through the process of identifying measures, the tendering to implementation, maybe that can answer multiple of these questions at the same time.
The question is very good, and that's probably why I've not included it within the presentation, because it's probably the most complex part of the whole thing, as you can guess. First of all, is there a potential in each of the municipalities? So it's easy to go to see a mayor and say, it will cost you nothing. We will change everything. You'll reduce your cost. You're going to be carbon neutral, and it's wonderful, and there's no risk. The challenge is with the size of municipality that we have, is there a project? That's the first concern that we have. So that's where the FQM plays a central role. The FQM works with these municipalities days in, day out. They work with them on a lot of things. One, among others, is they have a structure of insurances. So they insure most of municipalities, so they know their asset. So we have a wonderful and unique partner over there who knows municipalities. So we start by gathering the invoices, the type of facilities, and we look at the potential of savings just based on a random, not a random, but just based on the rule of thumb, essentially. We don't visit the places, we just look at it. We ask a few questions. Has there been retrofit? Yes or no? Have you changed your building facility at some point? Well, a lot of these buildings has been built 50, 60, 100 years ago. So a lot of them are there. If there's been no projects, nothing, and the consumption is high enough within a municipality, we would start thinking that there is a potential. So that's our first screen. The second screen is that in order to tender, we have to provide information to ESCOs. The biggest challenge we face is essentially how to attract ESCOs to bid and reduce their bidding costs. Because if they would have to go see the 400 buildings within a bid, over a territory that as big as probably some even of the countries of the people who are based are watching this webinar, that would not make it interesting. So we essentially visit the municipalities and work with them to gather the minimum information that is needed for the ESCOs to bid. So again, all the invoices, the specificity of the building, so the list of the building, the square footage or the square meters of the buildings, and then in some of them, the ones that show the most potential, which is essentially the biggest buildings, we will have a walkthrough audit, essentially just to say, is there such a potential, and identify a few of the measures. One of the things we discussed with the municipalities is there specificities about their buildings that the ESCOs have to know. So we have three types of things. We have the essential measures. Well, you absolutely have to change the boiler, absolutely have to change this, because the end of life of these equipments are coming in, and it would be essential for them to have that measure implemented. So we have the mandatory measures. We have the wishful measures, if you want, the ones that it would be nice to add, and just by that walkthrough audits, you say, well, it's kind of obvious that this and this could be included. It's not mandatory. If the ESCO thinks it's not financially viable, they don't have to do so. They don't have to include it. But normally, we point to them where it could be of interest. And we have the other one, which is the no-touch part. So don't do this, don't do that, because the building is going to be destroyed, the building is going to be changed. There is some reason why the building cannot be stop for operation for retrofitting because of whatever reason. So whatever that can come up as a limitation, we provide to the ESCO. Now, when the ESCO will bid, we assume, and that's an assumption that's been validated, that 20% of the buildings will probably generate 80% of the savings. The other 80% is going to be small. There's still savings that we want to have because globally is going to be important, but we don't think that's going to be the focus of the ESCOs at first. And we ask the ESCO, provide me the biggest projects you can. So they're going to be probably focusing on the 20% of the buildings with a lot of information that we'll have up front to limit their cost of bidding. And then they will have their best capacity to provide us some kind of a project that's going to be the limit, the lower limit that they think they can achieve within the lot of the municipalities. So let's say one says it's going to be $500,000 savings per year. That's what I think as a minimum. Then one ESCO is selected on that basis, plus other qualitative element of the qualification, and then that ESCO will do the investment grade audit. They've been selected. They will have to demonstrate that they can achieve that 500. We hope they're going to have 600, 700, 800, because they will have the 80% of other buildings. They will go deeper into buildings, but then they will be incentivized to do so because they will be sure that if they meet the minimum, they will actually get the implementation. So that becomes a way where you have 10 ESCOs coming in, a few coming in to bid because they will look at everything, then selecting one, and that one is involved. So it's a lot of tweaks because there's a lot of rules related to procurement. Even though we find a way to change the regulation, there's still a lot of things that has to be followed. So we have to adjust it, make sure we're following the regulations, and on the other end, making sure that the ESCO are incentivized to bid. Our success is not only that we have one bidder that wins. Our success is we have many bidders and many ESCOs that are going to be able to implement all of these projects over the province. So we have to be very, very concerned of the attractiveness of our process for the market itself, the ESCOs themselves.
Well, thank you, Pierre. At least that I think that covered many of the questions I was thinking that requested some insights on this aspect. But if I understand correctly, then there is a sort of one selection process of one ESCO that wins the bid based on this, mainly the savings that they think can be achieved. And then that ESCO will itself do a more in-depth analysis. And then is that original agreement then changed based on the new analysis, or the agreement stays the same? And
well, as far as the ESCO selected, they have to at least demonstrate that the minimum savings that they have, but we open the door to increase savings. Obviously, the focus is to have the biggest project. The biggest and the best project is essentially the one that generates the most savings, both on the carbon side and the electricity side, and as well as the demand side. So we want them to do the bigger project, and they're incentivized to do so. The challenge we have is the selection process. In the private sector, we do have a very more simple way to do that. So we then do sole source. So an ESCO can come to us, essentially say that there's a project and say, would you like to be involved as a super ESCO? So we work sole source most of the time. When we have a procurement on the private sector, it's a lot easier because we essentially invite a limited number of ESCOs, which is not the case in the public sector. And we as well have discussions with all of them. So it limits their effort to essentially qualify. When you work in the public sector, for transparency, for fairness of the project, you cannot do these kind of sole sources and limiting the numbers and all that. But we recognize that the biggest barrier for the ESCO to come in is the cost to get the project, is the cost to bid. So if the cost is very big and our project is rather small in size, then there is a mismatch that doesn't work. So that's why we're bundling on one side to have the biggest project possible, so it becomes attractive. And on the other side, focusing on limiting what the ESCO will have to provide, even though it's still quite a lot because you have so many buildings to look at to provide a bid. But again, we're trying to limit it to the strict minimum, so we're able to come to the selection of one ESCO as rapidly as possible, and that will be that one that will invest itself in developing the biggest project, and obviously for them the biggest benefit, because benefit is part of the size as well of the investment. So that's really the challenging part. Where we invested the most time is on this, to find a way to make something work both for municipalities to reduce their transaction time and cost, and as well as the ESCO to make it attractive. So we are having an interest in the program.
Thank you. I see we have 4.5 minutes left, but we still many questions. So I'll take the ones that we can make. Is there procedures in place for accrediting new players, new ESCOs for these projects? You mentioned you want to expand, so there must be something in place to look at basically the capacities, but will you have a dedicated accreditation process, or how will it work?
We have a pre-accredited process, and it's a very good question. A very good question. We do have one because we want to make sure that everyone who will bid will be accepted if they win. So the last thing we want to have is someone bidding and then being refused because they're not qualified. So the qualification is both qualitative and quantitative. On the qualification, we want someone who's able to implement the project, design and implement. So that's kind of obvious. You look at the capacity of the engineers, the experience that they have, and they can be a joint venture. It could be an engineering firm coming in and they have the expertise. The biggest challenge we have is on the quantitative. So if they guarantee $5 million savings, you have to be able to back it up. But we have a lot of big construction companies that are not acting as ESCO who do have pretty profound capacity to guarantee. And that's why we want to have that match. So yes, there is a pre-qualification process, and we will support the new ESCOs coming in. I'm assuming there will be some kind of consortium. Maybe my assumption is wrong, but I'm assuming technical capacity on the engineering side, construction and financial capacity on the construction side. Maybe an investor would want to invest in it, and we will support them in qualifying. Because again, the success of our program is a market transformation program. Not only we want the municipalities to achieve their goal, but we want the creation of new players that will be able to work not only in the municipal sector, but as well in the private sector at a smaller scale. And that's the challenge, as you know, is if you want to decarbonize an economy, you cannot just focus on the big projects or just municipal projects, or just, you have to focus on everything. So that's one of our goals. And yes, there is a pre-qualification process and a support process to make sure we can have new players.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. I think we can take at least one, maybe two questions about technical knowledge and capacity for the municipal teams. Are there plans, activities during the project development stage to support that, or are the municipalities, and the second part is my words, municipalities don't necessarily have to interact too much with the ESCOs, and because all the technical aspects are taken care of somewhere else. But is there an issue with that? Can you maybe elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's a huge concern that we have. First of all, with the federation, we have training courses, and we have a lot of capacity to support them in understanding the program and be able to sign a contract with the FQM, because it's still a specific contract, so there has to be a very big understanding. And we do have an open approach where they will be able to participate in the project implementation. It's still their facility at the end of the day, so we cannot just implement things that they don't agree with. The challenge with it is going to be very diversified as far as capacity of the municipalities to do so. The very, very small one will probably not have the capacity, human resources wise, expertise wise. So the federation will probably act on their behalf, but the measures on the other end are going to be very, very simple. If you just replace the lamps and then replace a few motors, that does not transform the buildings in any way, in any significant way. When we have municipalities that have the capacity, they will be involved directly in the selection of the measures with the ESCO. So the ESCO is proposing, but there's always the possibility of the municipalities to refuse them for whatever reason. And in the implementation itself, for coordination of timing, of type of equipment, of everything, then it becomes a direct discussion between the municipalities and the ESCOs as far as they have the capacity. So we will favor that quite a lot. And that's why the FQM is omnipresent. It's there all the time. Remember that the FQM is representing the municipalities. It's kind of an extension of the municipalities, so they're representing their interest. So in that sense, they're going to be well served. But it's a huge challenge to work with many of the municipalities, as I said at the beginning, that don't have these technical and financial capacity to follow such projects. So we'll do the best we can, but the measures at the smaller scale where there's not going to be that much capacity will not going to be intrusive. They're going to be rather simple and not change the way the building works and the municipality use of them. So we don't expect too much challenge, but it's still a challenge to work with very, very small players.
Well, thank you for that. I think there's one more question on public procurement. We're over time, but maybe we can indulge, if you'll indulge us, Pierre. One clarification: is the public procurement of the contracts done in one stage? I think you maybe have answered that question, but basically, maybe it's, are there multiple contracts then with the ESCO? Because I understand there is one public procurement, if one ESCO is selected, is there a new contract done after they have done their audits?
You're right. So that becomes a little bit technical, but I try to answer it as simply as possible. If we were to conclude a contract with the ESCO and the ESCO would fail at the investment grade audit to essentially confirm that they're guaranteed, we would have to procure again. Okay. And that we don't want to do. So we want to be able to go to the second best if that's the case. So the way we designed it with the help of the FQM is essentially that there's a process of selection, which is 2 phases. All the ESCO bid with the minimum performance that they say they can guarantee. And then what we have is a pre-selection. So we don't sign a contract with the ESCO, but we essentially inform them that we have the intent to sign a contract if they're able to demonstrate that their minimum is going to be met. They do the investment grade. If they do, we have an obligation to sign the contract with them. If they don't, then we have not signed the official contract with the ESCO yet. So we're able to go to the second best because the first one will have not met the minimum criteria of selection. So that's a tweak there because the question is very, very good. The thing we want to avoid is to have another bid. So we want to do it to one bid and be able to select the best offer, which would be the best offer at first or the second best if needed.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that clarifies quite well. And a nice solution. Then there is, can you, on public accounting, so accounting rules, is the, I guess it refers to the investments, is it outside the balance sheets? I guess so, from what I understood from your presentations of the municipality.
Yes or no? Yes and no. Well, first, it's not out of the balance sheet itself because it's still recognized as a debt. So that's what I explained a little bit prior, is that because municipalities are requested to do their accounting in a specific way based on the national regulations, and in every country will have these kind of national regulations. In Europe, it will be the stats, so Eurostats, and then deploying into every country's stats. There is a specific way to do so, and unfortunately, as many energy efficiency projects are the case in the public and even in the private sector, they at the end go through the balance sheet. What we negotiated with the government is essentially there's two pots of liability, if you want. There's one that they have to meet, which means that their taxation capacity has to be able to meet their expenses, including any loans that they take, the reimbursement of the loans. That has to be equal. So if you borrow money, you either have to reduce your expenses somewhere else, or either you increase the taxes. What we've done is we went into the second part of it, which is liabilities that do not have an impact on the first one because they're generating a revenue. And that's our case. So as we're generating a revenue, and our revenue, we're comparing ourselves to wind plants. Our revenues are not production of electricity and sales of electricity, is the reduction of the cost. And that's what we spent probably 2 years with the government to explain and go through. So they accepted to take our liability and put it into the second category, which does not have to be met by taxation, but it has to be met by revenues. So if a municipality owns a windmill, they don't have to tax the people living in the municipality more because they have revenues against it. In our case, they accepted that our revenue is against the reduction of the cost, making the whole liability neutral and does not impact their capacity to borrow. I'm not sure if I explained it well. So it's still on balance sheet, treated in a special way that achieves the goal that we wanted, which is not limiting the municipalities. So they can do whatever they want as far as park, improvement of facilities, and whatever they want to have as a municipality, and do the decarbonization project at the same time without impacting one another.
I think that explained it quite well, at least for me. Okay, last question came in, so let's do that as well. When is the transfer of property rights in the assets transferred to the clients?
Yeah. As soon as the measure is functioning, as soon as it's operational, we transfer the asset for many reasons. One of which is that the municipality wants to operate it, so they want to be able to use it their way, so it's their own. The second thing, and that's a particularity that we have in Canada that in Europe doesn't seem to be the case, we leave the maintenance to the end user. So within a municipality or even with hospital or schools and all that, they either have their own staff for maintenance, so they don't want to replace them, or they hire subcontractor locally. So our ESCOs very often in Canada, some of them can offer maintenance, many of them do not want to offer the maintenance. So we leave the maintenance obligations to the end user with a very specific set of rules that if they don't follow, then there will be a default. So that the asset can be transferred, and we don't need, as far as EcoEnergy 360, a link with them, because we have a very huge trust in the municipalities to pay us, because again, they're paying the federation, which is part of them. So we don't need these assets on one point for these two reasons: cultural part of how ESCOs are operated in Canada, and partly because we don't need it as a security. So we don't securitize our payment through the ownership of the asset. So they're transferred as soon as the measure is confirmed to be functioning, operational, not necessarily generating savings, but functional. So a chiller is working and it's actually providing the cold water. Equipment is transferred, municipality owns it, operates it, and maintains it.
Well, thank you. I think that was the last question we could do for now. And we're over time, but I think we saw a lot of interest from the audience as well, wanting to get into the details and nitty-gritty. I think this is something that is becoming more and more common, to see that these technical questions arise, and it's really great to have experts like you, Pierre, being actually able to get into these details and also taking the time to do so. Thank you very much to all your listeners that have participated. I learned a lot and also got inspired about how some of these things could be transferred in other jurisdictions. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you also for the staff facilitating and organizing the technical aspects of our webinars. We are done with this webinar today, but we're not done with our series of webinars. We have already other webinars and topics that have been requested in the making, so stay tuned with us. You'll hear from us over the summer about upcoming webinars and events. We already have the dates for the next International ESCO Symposium. We don't have a registration page yet, but you will also keep updated on that as it evolves. Thank you very much again, Pierre. Thank you for your presentation, and I guess we'll see each other soon. And thank you everyone for participating.